Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi and you're watching Scope. On today's show, we're going to discuss the U.S.-sponsored draft resolution at the United Nations General Assembly, which failed to garner enough votes. This resolution sought to condemn Hamas for the first time at the international body. We'll, of course, discuss what this means going forward now for the United States, for Hamas as a Palestinian movement, and, of course, for the entire Palestinian cause as a whole. Let's discuss this further. We're joined right now from Ramallah by Dr. Mustafa, who is a Palestinian physician, activist, and politician. Dr. Barghouti, thank you very much for joining us here in the Scope. Dr. Barghouti, what do you make of the failure of this draft resolution at the United Nations?
It's a big thing. Actually, it's a big blow to Nikki Haley, the delegate of the United States to the United Nations, and also it's a big blow to the administration of Mr. Trump. The fact that they failed to get this resolution passed, and the fact that Palestinians managed to get 8 other resolutions after that passed, and with an astonishing majority of more than 150 votes, that is a very clear indication of 3 things. First of all, the justice of the Palestinian cause, and the fact that the whole world understands that Palestinians have been suppressed, oppressed by the Israeli occupation, and they have the right to be free, and they have the right to resist occupation. Second, it also revealed that the United States policy under this administration is absolutely and totally isolated. And that is because it has been totally biased to the Israeli side, and not just totally biased to the Israeli side, but actually totally biased to the most extreme elements in Israel and the most extreme racist groups that are governing the government of Israel. Third, it has revealed that there is no future for the so-called Trump plan, or what they call the deal of the century regarding the Middle East issues. Without the acceptance of the Palestinian people, without justifying the needs of the Palestinian people, without fulfilling these needs, there is no chance for the American administration to pass anything. The behavior of Ms. Nikki Haley, as well as her administration, in taking such a strong stand against Palestinian people and against their right of resisting occupation, practically has killed any opportunity for the United States to play a role of a mediator.
Dr. Barghouti, the Israelis would counter what you've just said and would say that Hamas uses rockets indiscriminately, firing them at Israeli towns, Israeli villages throughout the occupied territories, and that, that Hamas in general is a terrorist organization. How do you respond to those accusations? Because that was what essentially the text wanted to say.
Well, first of all, this resolution was not only against Hamas. It was against all Palestinians, against Palestinian people, and against the rights of the Palestinian people to resist occupation. In a way, the way this resolution was drafted was done in a way that violates international law, because international law says very clearly that any country that is under occupation, any people who are under occupation, have the full right to resist the occupation in all forms, including military forms, as long as they respect international humanitarian law and do not attack civilians and so on.
So, Dr. Barghouti, as I earlier asked you as well, I wanted to ask you, going forward, when we're talking about the Israeli point of view on Palestinian resistance as a whole.
No, I was saying it's not acceptable that if rockets are shot from Israeli planes, they are considered okay and legitimate. But if Palestinians defend themselves with a much more primitive forms of small rockets in response to Israeli attack, that it is a terrorist act. In reality, the party that is practicing terrorism here is Israel. And the party that is occupying us is Israel. Israel is occupying Palestine. Palestinians are not occupying Israel. And it is Israel that has created the most and the worst system of racism and apartheid in the human history. And it's Israel that is conducting the longest occupation in modern history. And it is Israel that is conducting ethnic cleansing and continuing to do so through settlement activities. So if we speak about violation of international law, it is Israel that is doing it. And in my opinion, trying to accuse Palestinians of being terrorists is nothing but a game that Israel plays to prevent us from any source of power to achieve our freedom. And it's a way of trying to make us submissive to the Israeli occupation and oppression. And this will never happen.
Dr. Barghouti, I'm sure you've seen the reaction to this vote as it took place at the United Nations on the part of specifically Israeli officials. Here I'm talking about the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, for example, has actually celebrated, and even Benjamin Netanyahu celebrated, even though the fact that this vote didn't go through, but they've celebrated the fact that in their point of view, more countries have sided with Israel or have at the very least abstained in this vote at the United Nations General Assembly. What do you make of that point of view that seemingly, at least according to the Israelis, more countries now are willing to condemn or at least not vote against a resolution that would condemn Hamas?
Well, it's a silly behavior, really, because first of all, Netanyahu has been criticized severely for his failure in Gaza. And now he is severely criticized for the caricature of what he's doing in the north, claiming that he is closing tunnels that are created by Hezbollah. In both cases, he is perceived as trying to create an elusive battles that he is winning. And the public knows that. And the Israeli media is very clear about criticizing him and accusing him of being a liar. On the other hand, Mr. Netanyahu is now suffering from the fact that he could be persecuted for committing bribery and for committing corruption. And at any moment, he could be sent to jail for these things. So he's trying to create victories that never happened. And I think their celebration in the United Nations is not justified. Of course, we are not happy at all with the fact that the European countries voted with them this time. But exactly and immediately after that vote, which they failed to get a resolution from, the whole world community voted for Palestinian rights. 150 votes against 6 only, which is Israel, United States, and small islands that have very little population. Yeah. So 150 to 6 versus 88 is clearly a Palestinian victory and not an Israeli one.
So I'm glad you brought up that other resolution, because that leads me to my next question, because that was interesting that right after this specific US-sponsored resolution failed, the Irish sponsored resolution passed, and it called for the achievement without delay of lasting Middle East peace on the basis of previous UN resolutions, and it singled out the December 2016 measure. It reaffirmed unwavering support for the two-state solution of Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within recognized borders based on the 1967 borders. Why do you think it is that the international community supports that more than just condemnation?
Well, because they know this is what international law indicates, and because most of the countries of the world believe that Palestinians should have a state of their own and believe that occupation should end. Of course, we know that the United States government and Israel have exercised a huge amount of pressure on many countries to vote for them. I think that promises were made about financial aid to some small countries in Africa. But regardless of that, they couldn't pass the resolution. Let's remember that their resolution, which aimed at condemning Palestinian resistance, had to get 2/3 of the votes. And the decision that they had to get 2/3 of the votes was after a decision that was voted in the UN, and they lost. So they tried to get that resolution, they couldn't. And as you have mentioned, the vast majority of the world community supports our rights. By the way, part of the Irish resolution, which was passed and almost unanimously, relates also to the Security Council resolution, which condemned the settlement activities, and the 2334 resolution, and which said that all settlement activities should be stopped, and that it was illegal and a violation of international law, There was also another item about respecting Geneva Convention, which Israel does not recognize and violates every day. So no, I think in general it was a defeat, but that does not mean that we, the Palestinians and our friends, should not work very hard also on countries that voted for the Israeli resolution to explain to them that this would have been a mistake. You see, Israel wanted a vote against Palestinians. And they figured out that if they go after Hamas specifically, they could get more votes because there is a wrong perception about Hamas among certain countries, that it is not that it is a violent organization. So they used that as a tactically to get a resolution which was aiming to be against Palestinian people, not just against Hamas. And they failed. And they failed, in my opinion, drastically.
Dr. Barghouti, in the past year or years, in fact, we can say, the Israelis have been trying quite hard, haven't they, to try to, get diplomatic relations up and running with many of regional countries. We can talk about many of those visits that Netanyahu has had, specifically recently to Oman, for example. But yet we've had all of these Arab countries voting against this resolution. Even the Saudi ambassador to the United Nations said this resolution would undermine the two-state solution, which we aspire to. Where do you think Israel is going wrong in its understanding of this entire issue? Netanyahu touts over and over again, as you well know, that, listen, we're becoming closer to the Arab countries, but it seems that the Arab countries, even in the international arena, are not actually getting closer to the Israeli position. Why is that?
The Israeli strategy is based on three issues. First of all, to try to convince the world and the region that the main contradiction today is not between Israel and the Arab world, but between the Arabs and Iran, between the Sunnis and Shiites, as they claim. The goal of that is to marginalize the Palestinian-Israeli issue. The second goal they have is to try to liquidate the Palestinian cause completely by liquidating the right of the Palestinian people to have an independent state, by settling settlers in Palestinian territories, and by subjecting Palestinians to a system of apartheid. In parallel with the third goal, which is to normalize relations with the Arab world, with the Arab countries, in violation of the Arab Initiative, which said that no relations would be established with Israel without first solving the Palestinian issue. So their goal is to liquidate the Palestinian issue, actually. And in my opinion, in this particular vote in the UN, they failed drastically. The Israelis are wrong in one thing, which is that they underestimate how important the Palestinian issue is to all Arab peoples. And even if some Arab governments are conducting secret contacts with Israel, and even if they give Israel certain promises, their people will not accept that. The peoples of the Arab countries and the Muslim countries will never accept to take a stand against the Palestinians. And that is something that Mr. Netanyahu has underestimated. This is something that Mr. Kushner and the rest of the American administration have underestimated, and it will remain a major issue. The main destabilizing factor in the area is the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians and the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land.
So then, just so I understand you clearly then, and I know you alluded to this in your first answer, Dr. Barghouti, but do you think that this Trump peace plan, which he talks about so much and Jared Kushner talks about so much, seemingly behind the scenes at the very least with many regional leaders, do you think that that will fail then? Because I imagine with a president like Donald Trump in the White House, that brings a lot of pressure on regional countries, doesn't it, in his own ways, tweeting at them or speaking at them publicly, or, demeaning them, or in his other tactics which he may use to try to pressurize these countries into coming in line with his policies?
Exactly, it will fail. And I think the symbolism of what happened in the United Nations is a very strong indicator that if they present their plan, it will be rejected. Of course, they are trying to implement the plan de facto on the ground by sending the American embassy to Jerusalem, by recognizing Jerusalem as a unified capital of Israel, including the occupied East Jerusalem, by cutting aid from UNRWA with the hope that this will liquidate and eliminate the issue of Palestinian refugees and their right of return, But they have failed. The only other country that moved its embassy with the United States is Guatemala. No more. So that's a sign that the United States policy is isolated. Even with UNRWA, they cut off their support to UNRWA, which was the largest. It was 1/3 of UNRWA's budget, but that budget is already covered by many countries, including Arab countries. And UNRWA has never had a better budget than this year. So that means that the United States' effort to suffocate UNRWA failed. So they have failure after failure. And Nikki Haley insisted on ending her mission in the United Nations with a big slap in her face, actually, or to her face. That's what happened. I think that vote in the United Nations should be a sufficient indicator to the American administration and to the whole international community that Trump's plan will fail. Nothing will pass unless Palestinians accept it.
Very well, Dr. Barghouti, please do stay with us. We're going to go for a very short break, viewers. We're going to be back after that break discussing this very important issue a bit further. There are obviously a lot of aspects to the Palestinian cause which remain to be discussed, and we'll discuss all that after this break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us, viewers, as we continue to discuss the resolution sponsored by the United States that sought to condemn Hamas and Palestinian resistance as a whole at the United Nations. That resolution failed to pass at the UN General Assembly, and we're discussing the ramifications of that and the Palestinian cause as a whole with Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who is joining us live now from Ramallah. Dr. Barghouti, I wanted to get back to you, and I wanted to ask you, one of the other things that that Israeli officials and Israeli media is picking up on a lot when it comes to this vote, and I wanted to get your view on that, is that the Palestinian officials at the United Nations, defended the right for Palestinians to resist, defended Hamas essentially as well, saying that they would not be voting against any party which is Palestinian. This, of course, trying to play on any internal divisions that may exist. What do you make of that, Dr. Barghouti?
Yes, of course. As the Palestinian representative and the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and the PLO was actually not defending only Hamas as one very essential part of the Palestinian struggle, but they were defending the whole Palestinian people. Everybody is mature enough to understand. Don't try to play inside our house. Don't try to abuse the fact that there are serious differences between Fatah and Hamas, and this split that exists and that we are working day and night to end can be used to justify attacks on one side of the Palestinians or the other. These were very strong two messages, which were very highly appreciated. And in my opinion, that position in the United Nations have improved the chances of better dialogue internally between Palestinian groups and of better chances of creating a national unity government as soon as possible and end this internal and unacceptable division that exists. I think the meaning of all of that is that at the end of the day, when it comes to the basic Palestinian issues, there will be no differences between Palestinians. And in my opinion, there was very clear also understanding of the fact that we were not only defending, in this case, the Palestinian cause, but also the international law. And Israel was trying to violate the international law with the help of the United States in relationship to this situation.
Right. So, and I'm glad you mentioned that, the fact that this has been appreciated and may genuinely strengthen any future national unity government that may come in place, because even Fawzi Barhoum, I believe, the Hamas spokesperson, in fact, in his statement, thanked the Palestinian Authority for its position at the United Nations, and of course thanked the countries as well that stood by Palestinians at the United Nations. I'm wondering, what stage do you think we're at this point? And I know I'm asking a very, very macro question and possibly a tough question to answer, but what stage do you think we're at right now vis-a-vis creating that national unity government for Palestinians? Because without that, it does seem the Palestinian position is a tad bit weakened, isn't it?
I've just been to Gaza, about a month ago, after being prevented from the Israelis for more than 4 years from going to Gaza. And I had really to travel to Gaza through Egypt. I had to cross to Jordan, fly from to Jordan to Egypt, and then from Egypt through Sinai to Gaza. And then I met there with all the leaders of different parties, including Hamas, Jihad, PFLP, DFLP, Fatah itself. And also before that, we had meetings here with Fatah leaders. And but just for your audience to understand, a trip that would usually take 2 hours by car had to be 4 days, a trip of 4 days to get to the same point of Gaza. The more important thing is that through dialogue with everybody, I think we have come to the conclusion that the way out of this internal division goes through achieving 3 things. First, the immediate establishment of a national unity government, which can take over the responsibility of the authority both in West Bank and Gaza. Second is to identify a date for elections, hopefully in 6 months, but not later than 12 months. And that would give people in Palestine the right to choose their leaders. This is a right for freedom of choice and elections that we've been deprived from since 2000. The last elections we had in 2006, and we should have had elections in 2012, as well as 2016 and 2010, and then 2014, and now to 2018. So practically, we're talking about 3 terms we have missed. And the third point would be that all parties, including Hamas, Jihad, Mubadar.
Right. So, Dr. Barghouti, I'm wondering, when we look at this situation right now, as you've said, that the Palestinians are understanding that they really need to work towards a unity government as fast as possible, and in a practical measure, of course, for the Palestinian position to be that more stronger. I'm wondering then how you assess the Israeli actions recently, because it seems that obviously Israel, under successive U.S. presidents, has been able to build more and more settlements, encroach on ever more Palestinian lands. But that possibly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem like that has picked up pace significantly since Donald Trump has come into office, seemingly giving them carte blanche of sorts to do as they wish. How concerning is that for you?
It's very bad, of course, because this is a process that is killing the potential for two-state solution and for a Palestinian statehood. And in my opinion, the PLO made a big mistake in 1993 when it signed the Oslo Agreement, because that peace agreement was signed without guaranteeing first or insisting first on a complete and total freeze of settlement activities. Since Oslo Agreement was signed 25 years ago, Israel did not stop expanding settlements for 1 minute. And the result is that we had 120,000 settlers at the time. Now we have 750,000 illegal settlers in the West Bank. So no progress can be made without immediate and total freeze of all settlement activity. Not only in terms of building new settlements, but also in terms of expanding existing ones that is going on all the time.
All right, so let me add another voice to this conversation, if we may. Now join Professor Homa Baqi, who is a professor of international relations at IBA in Karachi, Pakistan. Professor Homa, thank you for joining us here in the scope. We appreciate you taking your time out to join us in this discussion. Professor Homa, you may have been observing the UN resolution which the United States tried to pass against Palestinians in general, including Hamas as a movement and Palestinian resistance as a whole. What did you make of the failure of that resolution and what this means for Palestinians going forward?
Well, I think it's one of many failures in the Middle Eastern peace process. The hope that was, the hope that went around with the Oslo Accords 25 years down the lane. A lot of people say that the Oslo Accords were a stillbirth and they were just tactical and they didn't really do anything for the initial two-state solution initiated there. And if you see what's happening in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine, it's the worst example of religious territorial expansionism. And this religious territorial expansionism is constantly justified, or it is carried out because the United States and other international players allow it to happen by either remaining quiet on it or vetoing resolutions preventing Israel's expansionism, or just closing their eyes to the situation to a point where it is almost a situation of apartheid, and it's nobody other than I think Bill Clinton, no, not Bill Clinton, the president, the U.S. president before him, who actually wrote a book. He said there's an apartheid, there's a apartheid in the Middle East that is going on, and gradually with the passage of time, the situation has become even more complicated. But who can deny the fact that perhaps the entire piece of Middle East is now hostage to the Palestinian situation, and the commitment to two-state solution is more diluted today than ever before, whereas the general agreement was that you recognize Palestinian Authority as the legal representative. The elections that happened, which brought Hamas to power, were rejected by United States and perhaps even United Nations. You initiate a process where you say take up the route of the ballot and give up the bullet, and when the route of the ballot is taken up and the results are not to your liking, you completely reject that, or you do not accept the representatives as the representatives of that area. So essentially what I'm saying is that there is a whole list of failures that are there, and they're largely there because there is a bias which is more than obvious, and as a result, the Palestinian resistance remains intact. It has worsened over the years, but it has also increased the plight of the Palestinian people. Gaza is called the largest prison on the face of earth. What else would describe the situation more?
Indeed, and let's talk, if we can, Dr. Barghouti, about this largest prison on earth, as even David Cameron, I believe, had described it, Dr. Barghouti. What do you make of and tell us, in fact, let me put it this way, what you saw when you were on the ground in Gaza the last time you were there?
Gaza is really a very difficult place to live in. The strangulation of Gaza, which is happening because of the Israeli-imposed siege since 2006, which means for 12 years already, has caused a lot of humanitarian problems in Gaza. I'll give you a few examples. People were living on 4 hours of electricity a day, which has affected the economy, affected the availability, of course, of energy for doing anything. It has affected households. Many homes, Gaza is a very small area, so there are lots of high-rise buildings, and people cannot get water up to their apartments because of lack of electricity. Water itself is polluted or salinated. 95% of water in Gaza is either polluted or totally salinated, undrinkable. And sewage systems are running free in the streets and ending up in the sea because of the lack of energy to treat the sewage systems. And we ended up so far with the pollution of 70% of the seawater. This is a very dangerous matter, and we have seen a lot of diseases coming back, including parasite infestation, hepatitis, typhoid, and other infectious diseases. Another problem is the suffocation of economy. 82% of young graduates in Gaza are unemployed, and the total number of unemployment is almost 60%. So there is an aspect of daily life is difficult. You're talking about a very little area, which is only 140 square miles or 360 square kilometers, with 2 million people living there. It's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. And because of all of that, life expectancy is going down, infant mortality is going up, lots of diseases are becoming very common, and it's a serious humanitarian crisis that has to be managed as soon as possible. And the most important thing that we need here is to end the Israeli siege and block of Gaza. You must also realize that because of the Israeli siege on Gaza, people in West Bank cannot go freely to Gaza, and people in Gaza cannot come freely to West Bank, and all of us cannot go freely to Jerusalem. So this fragmentation of the occupied territories is another problem that is affecting both Gaza and the West Bank.
You know, Dr. Barghouti, again, the Israeli argument would be that this is a problem which Gaza has created for itself, essentially, that the Hamas took over, and the Israeli narrative when it comes to that situation as a whole. Again, going back to the rockets, which you had earlier mentioned as well, and we had spoken about. So, I imagine the Israelis would say, listen, if you come to the peace talks table, all of these things can be resolved. Why not do that then?
Israelis are refusing to negotiate. The French leader issued an invitation to both Mr. Abbas and Netanyahu refused to come. The Russian President, Mr. Putin, also issued an invitation to both sides to have negotiations in Moscow, and Israel refused. Even when the French held an international peace conference with 70 countries participating, Palestinians went and Israelis did not show up. So it is Israel that is obstructing any possibility for negotiation. This is a basic factor. And second, and on top of that, if Israel claims that it has withdrawn from Gaza, then by which right it is blocking all entrances to Gaza? And by which right they are blocking the fishermen who are trying to go into the sea and fish? By which right they are preventing us from investing and using the very important source of gas that was discovered in Gaza? And by which right their planes continue to fly over Gaza? I think Israel never left Gaza. They are still occupying Gaza. And they refuse to apply Geneva Convention, which should be respected when it comes to occupied territories.
Very well. We're just going to go to another break, Dr. Barghouti, but please do stay with us, viewers. We're again, of course, keeping a very close eye and discussing this very important situation in Palestine and specifically in Gaza, as Dr. Barghouti there mentioned, the dire conditions in Gaza. We'll discuss all this just a bit further after this short break. Welcome back, viewers. We're continuing to discuss this very important topic about this U.S.-sponsored draft resolution at the United Nations, which was drafted to condemn, essentially, Palestinian resistance as a whole, including the Hamas Palestinian movement as well. To discuss this a bit further, we're joined by Dr. Shaista, who is a professor of international relations at Karachi University. Dr. Tabassum, thanks for taking your time out to speak to us here in The Scope. Dr. Tabassum, the Pakistani point of view, obviously, on the Palestinian issue has been a clear one from day one, I believe. Just give us an overview about what and how important Palestine is and the cause of Palestine for a country such as Pakistan.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Palestine is a very important issue, not only for the international community, but also for the Muslim world. And I think that Palestinian issue had been given new life by the Intifada 1 and then Intifada 2. And in fact, previously, for a very long time, because of the Israeli policies in the occupied areas and the international community's negligence, the movement or the rise of the Palestinian had been given least importance. But because of the popular uprising, especially led by Hamas and the PLO initially, but later by Al-Fatah and Hamas, had given new life to this issue. And for Pakistan, obviously, this is an issue of the Muslim community, Muslim people who have been suppressed by occupying powers, that is Israel. And in fact, for Pakistan, it should be seen from another angle, because Pakistan have been supporting the suppressed people of Kashmir. And Kashmir is a fundamental principle or the policy of Pakistan, and therefore our support not only to the people of Kashmir but also to the people of Palestine is the backbone of our foreign policy. So I think that for Pakistan and for rest of the world, Palestine is really a very important issue.
Dr. Tabassum, I'm glad you mentioned the Pakistani point of view on all this, and you brought up Kashmir as well. The Israelis would say, Dr. Tabassum, that the Palestinians are the ones that have been violent throughout these years, and that the Palestinians should just simply stop their violence. This should stop resisting. that term that we would use, resistance. What do you make of that argument on the part of the Israelis?
Well, I think when we talk about the people's right and people's right of self-determination, this I usually ask to my students, and this question should be posed to the people in the world, that if the people's demands are not met, then what else the people would do? I mean, what other ways are there? Should they stick to the liberation? Should they stick to only the political solution? I am not favoring, I'm not saying that people should take up arms and start fighting, but there should be some say to the people who don't want to live with any system, any state, and who wants to have the right of self-determination. And that demand of the people cannot be suppressed by force. I mean, there should be some limitation on the use of the force. And if the one party, the party which is in control of, what I mean is Israel, if they are in control of the area, the administration, they have all the power, they have all the means to apply. And if they are using force against the innocent people, I must say that they are innocent people, they are unarmed, they don't have access, their say is not being listened by the world community, then if they use the weapons like stones, I mean, how could they be called as terrorists, or they be called as using any force? I think that there is a very serious requirement that the world should think about the people who don't want to live and who want to have some kind of, I must say that, some kind of right of self-determination. So I think that this is, in fact, what I believe is that this is the world of the media. What is being presented by one state, by the powerful state, when they are in the control of the media. So that has been accepted and taken as the popular saying about any one nation. But I think that there must be some serious rethinking required to look into the Palestinian issue or any other issue. I mean, not only the Palestinian, but the issue of the Kashmiri people as well. I mean, there is the same and a similar situation prevailing in South Asia, which has been neglected by the world.
Indeed, and then I want to ask you as a final question then, Dr. Tabassum, about the role of the United States in this Palestinian issue as well. Because from day one, there has seemingly been an arguable bias on the part of the United States towards Israel and towards all its activities against the Palestinians. We can talk about Gaza, for example, as an open-air prison. That's something that David Cameron used to describe Gaza. What do you make of the U.S. role in all of this?
Well, I think that America has been in the forefront of recognizing the Israeli, they had played a pivotal role in the creation of Israel. U.S. was the first country that had recognized Israel immediately after its independence declaration. 11 minutes, there was no other country. So the role remains there. There are so many things, so many reasons of the American support, but it had never been in favor of the Palestinian. It was always in favor of the Israelis. Even the role that they had pretended to play, that is the role of the mediators or the mediators in the agreements that had Oslo and the accords that were concluded, it had never been in favor of the people of the Palestine. So American role had been very controversial in the sense that they praised that they were playing a role of the third party or neutral, but they had never been. And in fact, it was on the basis of that role which the U.S. had been playing that Israel is now taking all the policies, all the atrocities which they are doing against the Palestinians. So that cannot be without the support of the big power. It's not only the U.S. but the European states as well. So without the support of the strong backing, Israeli would have never been using that atrocity, the use of force against the Palestinians. So American role is very, very controversial, especially in the Palestinian case.
Very well, Dr. Tabassum, we appreciate your time, as I said, and of course, for sharing your very vital insight on this topic. That was Dr. Shaista Tabassum, Professor of International Relations at Karachi University, who was speaking to us on the line there, sharing her thoughts on this, again, a very important topic. And as our guests have spoken about throughout this show about the Palestinian issue, it's one that has been very long-standing, hasn't it? And it's been one where the question of who continues to support Israel throughout this and why it continues to support Israel throughout this, i.e. the United States and other Western powers, and the why there hasn't yet been a resolution on this very long-standing issue, what the role of the Arab countries may be, either side and otherwise. We'll keep a very close eye on, of course, this important story, but that's all for today's edition of Scope. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Waqar Rizvi.